Hello and welcome to the first ever recording of the False Start Fantasy Podcast with your hosts, Cameron and Josh. I am Cameron, the editor of the podcast, and this is Josh, the one who wins all of our fantasy football leagues.
Hey, yo, I'm Josh.
Now, we are starting a weekly podcast where we talk about our fantasy leagues together, as well as our thoughts on fantasy football for the week. And with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into discussing the fantasy draft that we just completed just this Sunday. Now, our fantasy football drafts, we have a sort of special rule that we call My Guys. This is a 12-man home PPR league, and that the My Guys was our third round. Josh, could you go ahead and explain what a My Guy is?
Yes, so my guy is essentially a player that you really like. However, we do have special rules with these my guys. They have to be at least 2 rounds in terms of ADP from the third round, which is the round we decided on. So a good example of this is I got my guy was Tyler Lockett. The ADP usually falls around the ninth round.
All right. Now, Josh, you had mentioned that Tyler Lockett was a perfect example of a My Guy. Then how about you go ahead and explain why you chose him as your My Guy?
So, growing up, I've always been a big K State fan. Tyler Lockett has always been one of my favorite players from K State. So, naturally, as soon as he comes to the NFL, he's automatically one of my favorite players, especially when he starts doing very good, even more so. So, he's just kind of always been one of those players I've enjoyed watching. I think he's severely given how talented he is.
Absolutely. He really is one of the shiftiest players out there, and his eye control for when the ball's coming at him. I mean, he catches like things that are just should be absurd, and it's not because he has the greatest hands, but because he just tracks the ball. Well, now
Very
some of
good.
the other yeah. Well, now some of the other my guys taken. We had Dalton Schultz taken by Jaden with the second pick in the third round. Big Cowboys fan. He used to be the Blake Jarwin fan, then Blake Jarwin got injured, so might as well get the other guy, right?
Exactly.
Next up was Elijah Moore, my guy. Elijah Moore was absolute stud for me last year in the few weeks that I was able to start him in my home league. I finished pretty close to the bottom in that league, but Elijah Moore kept me out of last place, which I am very thankful for. So I'm happy to have him back on my team. Next was Bandon taking Amir Abdullah. Now, Josh, could you explain the strategy in Amir Abdullah?
The simplest way I will put it is Bandon, the big Nebraska Cornhuskers fan. Miradula went to Nebraska. Is that?
Makes complete sense to me. After that, Sam chose Amon-Ra St. Brown. Another situation similar to mine, where getting a guy that saved your team last year. Brandon then chose Harrison Butker, so the first kicker off the board. And right after that went Justin Tucker to Chris. Now, I know that Harrison Butker is a pretty mean pick, but Justin Tucker, is there a little bit of strategy there, Josh?
According to Chris himself, yes. Every time he's picked Justin Tucker, he is at least getting second and only second. As far as strategy, you do miss out on some of the best players that you can draft. However, you do get arguably the best kicker.
That is absolutely true. And then for the last two my guy picks, there was Devontae Parker to Billy and your Tyler Lockett.
You did miss one. Hollywood Brown. Preston.
I did not know that was a my guy pick. I honestly thought that was just a pretty good pick in the third round for him.
His ADP is actually just low enough to where he counted as a my guy.
Oh, that's a good pick then from Preston.
And it was.
All right, well, now we're going to move on to the next segment here of our show, and that's to talk about our most surprising picks in the first four rounds. Now, Josh, I'll go ahead and let you go first because I think you have a very good one.
So, my surprise pick of the first 5 rounds was Monte Williams falling all the way down to pick number 3. picked up by our very own Ethan. This is surprising considering how in some drafts he goes as high as the second round or third round. Now, granted, we had the My Guys round, so that kind of pushed him back a little bit. But even then, the fact that he fell below even Cortland Sutton, very surprising.
Yeah, some surprising names to go before him were T.J. Hawkinson, Jalen Hurts, um,
Gabe Davis,
Nick Chubb, even
Juju.
Juju. Absolutely, just Cam Akers is another one. All these running backs going before Melvin Gordon, the second-year running back in the Broncos. So an absolute steal there for Ethan. Now, my surprising pick was Alvin Kamara falling to the 23rd pick. So that's still in the second round. And that's all the way down to Jaden with the second to last pick in the round. I found this to be surprising because you know me, I do a lot of best ball drafts. And Alvin Kamara is somebody that people are wanting because he had that week 2 years ago and he went 5 touchdowns to the championship week and absolutely ruined everyone who went up against him, myself included, as my little brother had him on his team to knock me out of the playoffs.
Good memory.
So I am personally shocked to see Alvin Kamara falling all the way to the back of the second round. I mean, he's truly one of those workhorse backs that are just fantastic. And guys like Ezekiel Elliott and CeeDee Lamb both going ahead of him. Those were pretty surprising to me.
Me, severely underrated in this draft considering how far he fell, considering how, for me at least, I was picking at the turn. At least looked at him. I ended up going with someone else, but he was one of those players I was on.
Yeah, you chose DeAndre Swift ahead of him. Was that for the pass catching upside?
Mostly upside, I viewed him as about having just slightly bigger upside, as a slightly better floor as well. Just basically a younger Alvin Kamara, essentially.
That makes sense to me. I think I have a couple DeAndre Swift picks myself, so I'm surprised he fell that far. All right, now moving on to the most surprising picks in the rest of the draft. Now, we don't have time to go over every single pick one by one. I'll see if I can add some sort of scrolling element that scrolls through each of the pages of the picks, but we'll see what we're able to do there. Um, Josh, I'll go ahead and let you go first. What was your most surprising pick after the fifth round?
Okay, so for me, it was D Hop getting picked at pick 88 by Chris. Um, if you were there in person for our draft, you would have seen quite easily that a lot of tight ends started going early, especially all the good ones. This was one of those that really wanted to get in. However, when he had a choice, he didn't pick up a Cole Kmet or anyone like that. He decided to wait one more round. As a result, Cole Kmet ended up going off the board. So literally just to use as trade bait, as he put it, he picked up DeAndre Hopkins. But to me, that was surprising considering how this is a strategy that normally backfires on someone.
I personally did not know that he was going to try and use DeAndre Hopkins as trade bait. Are you thinking that maybe after his suspension's somewhat over, he'll try and trade him for one of those top wide receivers, running backs, or tight ends then?
So he actually already has traded him away just yesterday, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Interesting. What was that trade? I don't have that.
Give me a moment to pull it up. Let's see if I can. There we go. So, for Kyle Pitts and Garrett Wilson, he traded away E Hop, Travis Etienne, and Pat Fryermuth over to Preston.
Interesting. So he does get Kyle Pitts, the elite tight end, but Garrett Wilson is someone who's going really far down in drafts. I am not so sure about that trade. He's really far down there, but he does get the elite top three tight end, and I think that's probably definitely worth it for him then.
Exactly. It took his team from being a bottom half team to at least an upper half team, in my opinion.
All right, then moving on to my most surprising pick of the draft, and that would be George Pickens at pick 113. and that was by Brandon. Now, George Pickens, I am liking the talent I'm seeing. I've been watching some of the preseason highlights and even some of the training camp videos, and that guy looks absolutely incredible. But to see him go ahead of guys like Kareem Hunt, Alan Lazard, the Packers wide receiver one, Darnell Mooney, Kadarius Toney, and all these other players, it just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not seeing why a rookie wide receiver would go that early.
The only thing I can think of is he liked what he saw on film and decided to take that shot in the dark because he didn't think he'd come back to it. Only guess.
I'm just looking at it now, and he also went ahead of guys like Chris Olave and Hunter Renfro. But if you're liking the talent that you see, and you're down here in these 10th, 11th rounds, and you're really getting down there, go ahead and take the guy you like, right?
Exactly.
All right then. So moving on to our final segment, we're gonna go ahead and talk about our favorite team that is not our own, because obviously I have the best team, and you, Josh, you have the worst team. Is that correct?
Try switching that around a little bit.
Well, other than ourselves, we're going to go ahead and talk about our favorite team of our opponents and our least favorite team. I'm going to go ahead and go first, and my favorite team was Bandon's team. I think he absolutely nailed the draft. I really liked what he was able to do. Getting Devonte Adams and Aaron Jones, set yourself up for these high ceiling, high floor guys that are just going to be absolutely fantastic. Um, I think that his my guy Harrison Butker was an absolute troll pick, but what he was able to do after that by getting Kyler Murray, Dawson Knox, a tight end who we now know just got paid a ton of money, Devonta Smith, who's a wide receiver that I love, Miles Sanders, Antonio Gibson are both running backs that are good backups. And then, I said that George Pickens was a surprise pick to me, but we're in the 10th round, and it does give him a lot of upside at that wide receiver position. And when you put him behind guys like Devonta Smith and Devontae Adams, you feel a lot better about having him there. And then my
It was a
favorite
very
pick that he got at
solid
the
year.
very end there was Khalil Herbert, who, as you know, went to KU and is my favorite college team. So I'm a big fan of him,
Naturally.
of
Overall,
course.
we drafted a very solid team. I only reason why I never put him as high is just because of that Cam Akers pick personally. Otherwise, easily a top four draft.
All right, and then moving on to my least favorite team, and this will really come as no surprise to the person who picked it, is Chris's team. Um, I loved the start of his draft. Getting Jamar Chase, Najee Harris, Keenan Allen, James Conner are picks that I absolutely love. And then I did not like a single pick after that until the 10th round. For picks 6, he went Travis Etienne, who could be a value there, in the 6th round. But Travis Etienne has to split a workload with absolute stud James Robinson. And everything coming out of training camp and everything coming out of the coaches is saying James Robinson's our guy. He's healthy. He's 100%. And I don't think people are realizing that James Robinson is probably the RB1 on that team, and maybe there's the hope that Travis Etienne at the very, maybe after their bye week, whenever that is, comes on and is just absolutely electric and takes over the job from James Robinson. But I just don't see him going away. And on such a bad team like Jacksonville, I really worry about that. After that's Joe Burrow. You mentioned that DeAndre Hopkins, which I guess he was able to trade, so that worked out for him. Um, and then Pat Fryermuth was just not a tight end I was believing in. I guess he was able to trade that. Elijah Mitchell, I do think was a good value in the 10th round, but those 49ers running backs, they really scare me. And I'm just not so sure about not just doubling down, but tripling down on the Jacksonville squad by getting Trevor Lawrence and James Robinson. I really think he's capping himself with this upside, but those are his last few picks, and he'll be able to do whatever he wants with the waivers off of that.
Exactly. And just for some context during the draft, because he was there in person for the draft, pretty much after he picked up Joe Burrow, it was a downward slope for him. Nearly every single pick that he was going to try to get, he was away from. So he started picking people purely for either trade bait or because they have an extreme high upside, but their score is also very low. Never know with injury as well. And some players who are kind of falling out of grace scoring to the fantasy community, like Russell Gage. And again, three Jacksonville players, which is a risky strategy to say the least.
Now you had some different people chosen for your favorite and least favorite teams.
Yes, so my favorite is Ethan. So let me pull up his team real quick. So started off Cooper Cup, pick number 5, very solid wide receiver 1 last year. Will he repeat again? Probably not to that extremes, but he's at least one of the best wide receivers right now. Followed by C.D. Lamb, Leonard Fournette, Nick Chubb, rounding out his wide receiver core and his running back core with two very solid runners who should get a lot of volume. And then the surprising pick, Javonte Williams, that gives him an excellent flex option right there. He has Lamar Jackson, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in fantasy, I believe. Zach Ertz gives him a very solid tight end, especially while D Hop is still suspended. At least once Zach Ertz comes back to play, and I guess I should say. Dolphins defense, questionable that he picked it where he did, but did get a solid defense and a solid kicker as well. And his bench is kind of what sold me on having one of the better teams combined with what he had as his starters. Arnell Mooney, Slave, and Walker, Brian Robinson once he comes back, Wandale Robinson. All very solid players. Most of them rookies, so there's a lot of question marks around them, but they turn out to be what people believe, very solid. And then he has Daniel Jones, which might perform for a game or two. That's it. But overall, a very solid team.
Absolutely. When you see a team that goes wide receiver for the first two picks, it's usually pretty nerve wracking. You're like, well, you're not going to be able to get any of the top running backs now. I really worry about your team. And then he follows it with Leonard Fournette, Nick Chubb, and Javonte Williams. And it's just like, how did you pull off getting two elite wide receivers in Cooper Cup and CeeDee Lamb, and then just getting top guys in those next three picks of the running back? I think he had an absolute fantastic first five picks and was really impressive there. Zach Ertz is, just like you said, he's got the upside. The Cardinals need someone to throw the ball to at the beginning, and he's got the chance to really repeat what he was starting to do last year when he was traded to the team. Overall, totally agree. Absolutely great team. And seeing those guys on the bench, Kenneth Walker, Brian Robinson, Wandale Robinson, Chris Olave, like those are four rookies, all back to back to back to back. Just absolutely taking your shot, saying like, you know what, these are guys I believe in. That's a good team.
Exactly.
Now, there was a team that you did not like as much as Ethan's team. To put it lightly, which team was that?
So for that one, I chose Preston's team. So to start off, Joe Mixon, pick number 10. Personally speaking, I'm not as high on Joe Mixon. I think he relies too much on touchdowns in order to be good as a football running back. I'm not saying he's not a good running back, however, for fantasy, he relies on those touchdowns, and I personally think the Bengals are going to be throwing a lot more, which will limit his touchdown ability. Then it's these next really 5 picks that really are the head scratcher for me. So Mark Andrews, I'm in the second round, a little bit earlier than I would have thought he would have gone, but okay, solid pickup. And then you had Hollywood Brown first, my guy, so not much you can do there. And he picks up Kyle Pitts in the 4th round, pick 39.
Now, any
That
other
one was
time,
surprising.
you'd be excited about Kyle Pitts in the fourth round, wouldn't you?
Normally, yes.
But when you get Mark Andrews in the second, are you gonna ever start Kyle Pitts?
The odds are only during the bye week, or if you think there's a favorable matchup over Mark Andrews. Overall, very questionable what he did there, picking two tight ends in his first four picks. Moving on, after Kyle Pitts, he picks up Russell Wilson. Very solid quarterback, has a chance to be a top five quarterback this season, I believe. Excuse me. Picks up Jerry Judy then. Solid. I don't think he'll do as good as Cortland Sutton, but overall a solid receiver. I think he reached just a little bit on him in the sixth round. Personally, I would have taken him in the seventh or eighth, early eighth. The seventh round pick was very questionable though with Melvin Gordon. Someone who, according to reports, might get as little as 25% of the workload, barring an injury in Denver. Picks up their backup running back. I'm also just now noticing he picked three Broncos players in a row, so Justin might be a secret Broncos fan at this point.
That was definitely something I had to ask him. Russell Wilson, Jerry Judy, Melvin Gordon. Those aren't really the three Broncos players I'm wanting this year, but if that team is, amazing as, let's say, the Bengals were last year, if they take that step altogether, it could be a real steal there.
Possibly. However, I do not think this will happen. I think Jerry Judy will be a solid wide receiver three, if I'll be completely honest. Melvin Gordon, barring an injury, won't really be fantasy relevant other than select weeks. Russell Wilson, a bit of a reach, but at that time, quarterbacks are starting to go off the board, so I can't blame him for reaching there. Moving on to his eighth round pick, Adam Thielen. Love the pickup there. Maybe a slight reach, but overall, very good pickup because I think he will have a good year. And he picked up the Colts defense, which questionable considering how it was the ninth round, but he still picked up a very solid defense there.
Yeah, and they play the Texans week one, so that's a good matchup for them.
Exactly. Brandon Ayuk, Trey Sermon, solid players. Um, Questionable with the Trey Sermon pick, but I guess you kind of need some running back depth eventually, so he decided to go ahead and get that. Considering how at this point he only had two running backs.
I would be okay with saying that the Eagles' depth chart after Miles Sanders is pretty wide open. Fantasy people, they want it to be Kenneth Gainwell because they know he catches passes, but the team seems to keep using Boston Scott, and you can't use Boston Scott forever, so maybe Trey Sermon has a chance there for something.
Exactly. And he picks up a backup kicker, which I personally wouldn't do, but hey, to each their own, I guess.
I think that's his starter. I think it's a
So,
starter.
sorry, my bad. I thought he had a kicker before that. My bad. Naeem Hines is his next pickup in the 13th round, which, okay, something happens to Jonathan Taylor. Naeem Hines should be a very good pickup. And then he picked up Garrett Wilson, who he no longer has, but I like that pickup at that spot. And for his last pick, why not put it on Marcus Mariota, someone who might actually be a decent fantasy football quarterback because of his rushing upside.
I think he will have those top 12 weeks. The quarterback position's pretty unpredictable, and he does have rushing upside that people don't talk about.
Exactly. No, it's just because those rounds two through really seven. Those are the rounds where you need a lot of depth. You need some star players. However, he did not. For that reason, Preston is my least favorite team as far as the draft.
All right, well, that about concludes the first ever False Start Fantasy Podcast inaugural episode. Thank you all so much for listening. You can find us on Twitter at Josh Newshafer and at Cameron's Ego on Twitter. We will be back next week before week two begins, so be on the lookout for our next episode so you can be ready before the ball is snapped. Thank you, and goodbye.
See you later, guys.